I want you to imagine that you are Thomas Jefferson, and you've got a big decision to make. The year is 1803. You were elected president in 1800, and you were elected president in no small part because voters liked your philosophy of governing, your philosophy of interpreting the Constitution. You are a strict constructionist. You believe that government, including the president, cannot do anything the Constitution does not explicitly say he can do. So this is something that accords with the feelings, the beliefs of the people who voted for you. You also believe in states' rights over federal authority. You think that government is best, that the government is best, that is closest to the people. This is kind of the essence of states' rights. And again, you think that unless the Constitution says that the federal government can do this, if it has to explicitly say the federal government can do this, then the federal government cannot do this. So this is your philosophy of governance. This is the way you think the American government ought to work, both vis-a-vis the states vis-a-vis the federal government and individuals versus the government generally. Smaller government is better. And if the Constitution doesn't exactly say that you can do it, you can't. So this is your position. This is your philosophy on entering office. And first couple of years, no particular problem. One of the problems, though, that you're trying to resolve is how can you, as President of the United States, guarantee to farmers of the Ohio Valley, the Mississippi Valley, access to port facilities at New Orleans, near the mouth of the Mississippi River? This has been a problem because in those days, before steamboats, when gravity was the way things flowed and things went downstream much better than they went upstream, access to the port facilities at New Orleans was crucial for the success of the farmers in that part of the United States that was that was west of the Appalachian Mountains. So you have sent some diplomats, some envoys to France. France at this point owns or has title to the Louisiana Territory, including New Orleans. So you send your diplomats to France to try to negotiate something. To your surprise, they send back and say, "You're not going to believe this, Mr. President, but Napoleon, the leader of France, has said, let's not just talk about New Orleans and rights of access to the ports there. How would you, Americans, like to buy all of Louisiana?" Now, Louisiana was, at this point in history, construed as the western half of the Mississippi Valley. So everything west of the Mississippi River, basically, to the crest of the Rocky Mountains. Now, this is something that really piques your interest, President Jefferson, because in addition to being a strict constructionist, you are a believer that the future of the United States lies in the West. You acknowledge that Americans in the beginning of the 19th century are an agrarian people. They're farmers. This is the way they make their living. You think this is the way it should be. You distrust cities, and you distrust industry, and you distrust bankers and all those kind of people. You trust farmers, and you recognize that for America's rapidly growing population, farmers are going to need more land. Farmers need land. If you double the size of the population, you better double the size of the land area available to those people because they're farmers. If you want to make sure that the farmers of this generation don't bequeath smaller farms to their offspring, because families in those days had 4, 5, 6 children. Now, the girls typically didn't get part of the inheritance. They had to rely on whoever they married, and it was expected that most girls, young women, would marry. But even for the boys, the farms are going to get smaller and smaller unless America's landed area gets larger and larger. So all of a sudden, Napoleon has offered you this deal. And you can tell that he wants to get rid of it. So the price is probably going to be pretty good. But you have this problem. And the problem you have is, as much as you want the United States to acquire Louisiana, as much as you think this is in the interests of the United States and of the American people for generations and generations, as much as you want this to happen, you realize that this conflicts directly with your philosophy of the Constitution and of American government, because you pull out your copy of the Constitution and you read very carefully, and nowhere in there does it say anything about the president purchasing territory from foreign governments to add to the United States. It doesn't say anything about Congress purchasing territory from foreign governments. And you have, again, have made your political reputation, and you have built your political rise on your philosophy of saying if the Constitution doesn't say you can do it, you can't. So you got this problem. Your philosophy, your sort of political word of honor says small government, strict construction. On the other hand, this deal is too good to pass up. You strongly suspect that if you pass this deal up, then future generations of Americans will curse you because they will be living in poverty, at least much less prosperity than they would if you had simply taken the deal. What are you going to do? So this is your conundrum. This is your problem, Mr. President Jefferson. What are you going to do? Well, I want you to think about it. So, I mean, what would you do if you were the president? Now, I will tell you what Jefferson toyed with, what he thought about doing. He said, well, you know, if you run up against a problem with the Constitution, if you think you ought to do something the Constitution doesn't allow you to do, one of the things you can do is simply amend the Constitution. So it wasn't impossible that the Constitution could be rewritten, and an amendment could be added to the Constitution saying, Congress and the President hereby have the authority to purchase territory from foreign governments to be added to the United States. The problem with that, though, is constitutional amendments take time. The Constitution, as originally written, was written with this procedure for amending it. And the whole idea was to make it difficult. Constitutional amendments were not supposed to be done on the spur of the moment. They were supposed to take time, and they were supposed to provoke reflection. So you have to get both houses, you have to get a supermajority in both houses of Congress to go along with it, and then you have to get 3/4 of the states to approve. So that's going to take time. I should add that Jefferson was the leader of the Republican Party. This was the small government party. His opponents, the Federalists, they were the big government party. They were the party of Alexander Hamilton, who always wanted to increase the size of government. And the Federalists were getting a good laugh at Jefferson on this issue, because if their guy had been president, if John Adams had been reelected in 1800, he would have just snapped it up, because John Adams was one who believed that if the Constitution doesn't say you can't do it, then you can. So that's the loose or the broad construction of the Constitution. So they were getting a good chuckle at Jefferson's expense out of this. And Jefferson thought about it, and he realized, it's going to take too long to rewrite the Constitution. And furthermore, Napoleon, he is notorious for being fickle. He will change his mind. I got to grab it now if we're going to grab it at all. So here's the question. Here's the question to you as Thomas Jefferson. What do you do? Do you stand on your principles, the principles that voters elected you to stand by? Or do you abandon your principles in what you perceive to be the national interest? This is your question. This is the question for you. This was the question for Thomas Jefferson. So think about it for a moment. Okay, so now I'll tell you what he did. Basically, he swallowed his scruples and said, okay, where's the contract? Let's sign on the dotted line. He recognized that, I'll say recognized. He concluded that there are moments in the tenures of presidents. There are moments when leaders have to rise above principle. Principle is a really good thing. Principle should be your anchor in making decisions. But sometimes unforeseen opportunities arise. And if you stand on principle, you might make a decision that wasn't the best decision for the American people. Your conscience might sleep better at night, but perhaps you would have betrayed the interests of the American people taken generally. So this is what Jefferson did. He accepted Napoleon's deal. He purchased Louisiana. And even at the time, pretty much everybody recognized this was a good deal. You can't pass this up. And historically, this is seen as one of the great decisions in American presidential history. Is it the decision you would have made?